my question here is that we see this very much European tsunami of regulation and things like that, and we also understand that the users are very fast movers, right? And they can move very quickly from one side to the other if they wish that fits their business model. So my question to the panel is that, how much are we actually spending on Europe and fragmentation versus the other continent and competitiveness around the world?
That's a very. Does anybody actually know the answer to that?
Well, I can just say from Citi's perspective, in particularly the sub-custody space, what we've found is actually Europe is a test bed for models going global. So, for example, Chai East, which is opening up in Asia, we've helped LCH, London Clearing House, set up the settlement process in Asia for pan-regional settlement. So we've taken what's happened in Europe and tried to innovate out there. Our broker-dealer clients particularly want those trading and netting and the reduction in costs. So we've found actually the investment that we've done in Europe to date has helped us design products for both Asia and Latin America. So we see that as a way, a sort of innovation platform. And the product managers tend to now sit in Europe and manage that as the subject matter expert in clearance or settlement globally. So that's how we see it, and we see very much Europe is driving change because that pan-regional governance, but still having that jurisdictional issue, other areas are flirting with that, but they haven't got the 30 years of European experience. So,
I can quickly follow up on the buy side. Frankly, I've been concerned for a while, and I'm still concerned. The buy side have big challenges in this area because, if you look at the cost, okay, they've got an OMS probably, but now they're going to need an EMS, and they're going to, work with their brokers. They'll need a smart order router, and they'll need algos, and there's so much technology that is required to really be effective in a fragmented marketplace. And I think that does potentially become a barrier to entry, or at least a barrier to growth. I mean, what I do, transaction cost analysis. It's expected now. If you're a US pension fund, you would expect your asset manager to be paying for transaction cost analysis by a third party. So part of it's technology, part of it's systems, which are about achieving best execution and managing and monitoring it and ensuring that you can deliver it to your clients. So that gets charged back one way or another ultimately to the clients because it's not a charity. But the costs of doing business are going up.
But there are advantages to the basic infrastructures that are developing.
So Okay.
There was a question here in the middle as well.
The challenge for the regulators is to do that right in this circumstance, because they come to this from the backwash of the financial crisis, where they are being told by their electorate that they have to stop this happening again.
And by journalists as well.
Yes. And the danger is that like many things, they will stop something exactly like that happening again, but won't stop the next problem. And the key to stopping the next problem is getting the dynamics right.
I think we actually agree. I mean, the regulator's primary function is to protect the final investor. That's what really their role is. And I think, post Lehman's, or post the financial crisis, I think too much regulation has been knee-jerk reactions to that crisis. That's what I'm concerned about. That regulation and our response to regulation will stop the drive for innovation and change and competitive, and stop the competitive pressure that we want to build up to drive consolidation. That's what we're concerned about. That regulation will divert people's attention from making the industry better.
What is it that T2S is trying to improve? Does the panel think the way they're going about it now will achieve that end, or are they going to go on a tour around bringing additional cost to everybody? In the end, impact may well be exactly the opposite of what they're trying to achieve.
even if you talk to the guys running the T2S project, they will say, yes, they're adding an extra infrastructure, but they think that will fundamentally drive others to review their business model and reduce their cost over time. The problem is how long that period works, and I think we've got to, as an industry, work through that. And all those CSDs, it's the end users who will be paying in some way. So there is that. I do think it is already, as I said earlier, I do think there are organisations that are using T2S to raise the profile internally of a fundamental business model change. And I do think that will drive change in the industry. But over time, there will be someone who picks up the cost, and who is going to pick up the cost. It will feed all the way through the brokers, the intermediaries servicing the brokers, through to the end investors. So for a short period, we're going to be paying more, and we're not going to achieve the efficiencies that we'd hoped, is my view.
I sort of agree with Tom. I think that ultimately, T2S will increase costs. I think that is pretty clear. However, I think it will act as a catalyst. I think it's already acting as a catalyst to drive some of the more fundamental change that's actually required. The reason we have fragmentation in Europe is because we have national, legal and fiscal frameworks that govern settlement and securities ownership. So all of that is really what's driving the complexity. And now T2S is not addressing those issues, but I think the drive to create a pan-European settlement platform will mean that people will look and are looking more seriously at trying to harmonise some of that settlement practice. And that's what we really need to be able to create a pan-European settlement platform.
Did I pick up from the tone of the way you asked the question that you've got a rather pessimistic view of what's going to happen with T2S?
Well, not so really. I suppose if you think what was said in the previous panel, if the end objective is to produce some benefit to the final investors, then I'm more inclined with what you just said, actually. I would have said if I had a budget and I was going to spend my budget on something that would make a fundamental difference, I would spend it on pushing through harmonisation and then allow the market to take the benefits of harmonisation through all the existing infrastructures, rather than something which looks like a project. Well, I'm a project manager from Euroclear. I better declare my interest in this. But I'm also actually advising a lot of the infrastructure development in China at the moment. So I'm looking at it through how they look at us. And I think they would say that they'll sit back and they'll watch. I think they're probably thinking that we're wasting a huge amount of money and becoming less competitive. And probably in the whole scheme of things, they will do things where they'll bring the economies of scale, which we haven't got that ability to leverage anymore, because we fragmented so much and added so many layers of complexity that we no longer understand how to be competitive. I think the project is the right sort of project, but when I first heard it announced, I must admit my first assumption was that it was a centralised clearing project that they were going to be doing, because I think they've sort of rather missed the target. I'd got governance or clearing, but I wouldn't have gone for settlement, because I don't think that's got the real end benefit that they're expecting, and the cost layers that are being increased as a result of it look.
But I think there is precedent that Euroclear should take some credit for this. That the ESIS project, bringing together the CSDs for the Euronext markets, I think has had genuine benefit, and certainly from our perspective, from a broker-dealer perspective, we've been able to simplify our processing across 3 markets. For trades executed on one exchange, and that's been good. Now, if T2S does ultimately achieve that aim, and ESIS was far more complex in the sense that it did look at the corporate action processing and some of the more difficult parts of the settlement chain. If T2S eventually does that, then I think it will be a good thing.
So I think you're right, if T2S actually achieves that. But then 3.5 years later, we shouldn't be at a point where we're still asking the question, is T2S a settlement platform with finality and liability, or is it a software platform? And that question still has not been answered. That's one of the big problems that CSDs have with signing a framework agreement. So if the idea is to have safer settlements and standardized settlements across Europe and protect the final investor, I agree. Ultimately, we may get to that point where an ESIS type model makes sense, but that's a CSD settlement system together. That's not separating settlement from safekeeping. And to be this far down the road and still not have those core questions answered, I think should be a big concern to everyone in the market.
Whose fault is that then? Where do we go to and say, give us the answer to this?
ECB. That question's been asked from day one. That question was asked day one, and
Yeah.
we're still fighting about it.
So that's one of the big issues. Okay. Now, what I was going to end actually. You give me a good structure to end. So completely differently from Ruben, who asked what should it be like in 3 years' time. I was going to be slightly more preemptive with it and really put the panellists on the spot and say, before Herbie gets his liver back into its preservative. Sorry. I'm going to put you on the spot and say, if there was one thing you could do now to ensure that they get their 3 years thing from the earlier panel, what would it be? You're going to get the last one, so that's even tougher. All the good ideas can get listened. There are no warnings.
This is very difficult. I think to get there in 3 years, I would have a way of imposing interoperability within 3 years. I'm not sure that's the optimal outcome for the long term, but I think it's the only way of moving quickly.
For me, it's got to be data, and I'm afraid it's the obvious one, which is the consolidated tape.
Yep.
But a consolidated tape which allows you to really get into the granular data as well.
Okay.
I think that if a company like ours, I think there's a lot of money to be made out there by vendors. People talk about regulators. I think there's enough inefficiency to attract companies like ours who are commercially minded, who end up acting like utilities, but are not utilities, are not driven, governed actually by commercial reasons. When we do our job well, a lot of the risks, issues, finality of trades start becoming a middle front office issue, not a back office issue, and I think that's when the market really begins to change, because cost and revenue are beginning to align up to the same place, and that's a big difference. And it becomes same day instead of T+3, etc.
Okay. So you're bound to have one big idea, aren't you?
Well, I mean, my short term, the one thing that will change the market is getting interoperability up and running. That will really change the dynamic of the equity market. But I don't disagree with Roy that actually the big thing is for organisations to drive this as a fundamental opportunity to change their business model. And I do believe that there are organisations really starting to take that challenge in the European market. So if it was imposed by regulators as interoperability, but I believe that the industry is at a point where they can and will fundamentally change the business model, because the equities franchises as they stand today aren't sustainable if they carry on in the same models.
Okay.
Another financial crisis.
Thank you, Ben.
Just to be really cheerful.
You would impose that, would you?
No. But I think Greece is
UBS looks for new financial crisis.
But I mean, we haven't talked about it, but the big issues out there, things like Greece and what's going to happen to the euro. The ECB clearly, as Tom said, have got a bit of a question to answer on T2S, but you could also argue that there's much bigger issues out there, I don't know whether that will necessarily mean that the post-trade space is top of the agenda.
Right. So a crisis in Greece would take the spotlight off us for a while. Okay. Well, we've run slightly over time, but I noticed there's a generous hour and a half allowed for cocktails, so we only used a little bit of it. I'd like to thank the panel, and I'd also like to thank Mondo for putting together a very interesting afternoon. So, thank you very much.